I'll start our workshop with a presentation of the results from our questionnaire. Our ambition was to receive 200 answers. So far, it's quite complicated, to address a lot of people. We have circulated the questionnaire to over 400 people, but uh, we are aware of the fact that there are so many dozens of projects, and the group of experts or people interested in that area of civil protection, leadership, crisis management, and disaster risk reduction is quite limited, and everybody is involved in different activities, and it's quite overwhelming for all of us to complete all the time different surveys. So this is the way I would like to thank to all those 40 people who found time and completed this questionnaire. I think that we'll keep the questionnaire open to other responders who might be interested by the end of the project to complete and give us any feedback, because it's quite a comprehensive one. The questionnaire is putting on the first place vulnerability of people. So we focus on the social and economic life and the impacts of different combined threats and multi-hazards and their cascading effects. The purpose of our questionnaire is to map the simultaneous, cascading, even disconnected but temporarily subsequent hazards or threats, complicate organizational responses, and these various forms of interdependencies, maybe short or midterm in the future. We are trying to identify the interdependencies of modern threats and risks, as already mentioned with some of the participants of today's meeting, that we are trying also to combine natural disasters with the disruptions of the socio-economic life, including also any type of and any form of violation as extremism or public violation or forms of terrorism, and to try to understand how these different phenomena can be linked, or how they are interconnected. We are trying also to examine the challenges in the context of the community response practices and high impact events driving the system adaptations. What are those we are trying to identify, and to outline the practical experience, as well as to map the recent threats and disasters related to societal challenges, including the technology and hybrid threats. Actors we addressed regional rescue services, national rescue services, universities, crisis management units, national emergency supply agency, also regional state administrative agencies, crisis managers, individual experts. In Slovakia, we have addressed also mayors, because they are, for example, considered as part of the network of crisis managers who react on the first place when something happens on local level. And what was the structure of the questionnaire? First part, we identified the experience and practices with disaster management and risk reductions. And we focus on the most frequent type of hazards and critical nature, technological and threatened regular functioning of the society. We followed those type of processes. We followed also the most common combination of emergencies and dynamic threats effects. And we try to understand how to build a resilience assessment matrix with what to invest and how to foster the vulnerability of the systems, people, and properties. In the second part, we focus on mitigation practices by examining the vulnerability in terms of health, social, financial, communities, and systems that are serving our citizens' life. And we try to define different attributes to each type of vulnerability and to assess what are the most common attributes that should be followed and taken into consideration when we are developing any type of contingency planning or investments or awareness campaign. And by the end of the structured questionnaire, We focus on the improvement of the crisis management by exploring what kind of means of communication should be used and what kind of models for enhancing the capacities and capabilities of those working in prevention, preparedness, reaction, and recovery should be. Now I'll present some of the results. That questionnaire had 17 questions only, and you'll see figures that are more than 100 percentages because the questionnaire was each question has a multiple choice selection, so it's we let people to rank practically from a list of selected criteria to rank them from 1 to 6, 7. It depends on the questionnaire. We would like to say that most of the 92 percentages of the responders are in fact involved they declare that they're involved in strategic planning, awareness, communities activities, and intervention, training, analysis, planning, and policy development. And practically 50 percentages of those responders, they declare that they are practically directly involved in the risk management cycle, which means that they cover one of those four phases. Plus, anytime we speak about prevention, preparedness, reaction, and recovery, and I will add one more phase, which is between the recovery and the prevention, and this is the contingency planning or reassessing the experience from the recovery and the reaction and transforming it into a new prevention measures. About 30 percentages of the respondents declare they are working with vulnerable groups, which is also very interesting and quite promising in terms of respecting for gender issues and taking care more about vulnerable people. However, the bad news is that we got out from that questionnaire that the number of vulnerable groups and groups which are in terms of disasters are more sensitive, it's increasing due to the fact that our societies are getting more and more vulnerable to different drivers, agents, and disasters. We map the critical multi-hazards and combined threats, and we map between 3 and 4 most usual trends of future combined threats and multi-hazards. On the first place, with 82 percentages, are the combination of natural disasters and disruption of the critical infrastructure. It's quite obvious that most of the responders link the critical infrastructure, I could say also strategic infrastructure, to all utility services that are of great importance in urban area, practically, including electricity, mobility, public transport, intercity transport, and any type of distribution networks. We are practically dependent on that, including internet, because it's also data distribution is maybe the most important these days. Then health threats and non-linear connectivity with the natural disasters. It's very important in terms of what could happen if in amidst of a health threat we get natural disaster. This is something that is of great importance, and we have I think that these answers are following some of the recent events that we have in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic in different parts of the world, very serious natural disasters, and mitigating the effects is quite complicated because we need to be prepared for evacuating people who are able to contage other people, and etc. It's quite complicated in terms of crowd management. Then we have biological threats in combination with public and social disorder, and here we come to the topic of violation like terrorism and extremism. It's also very important that responders, 15 percentages of the responders, they They also consider that it should be taken in a high consideration that many of those people aiming at public developing a kind of a public disorder for any type of political or other purposes, that they may use even biological threats to achieve their goals. And with 36 percentages of the responders, they think that usually natural events are causing also biological and health emergencies. I can give one example that we know that many of those communities, marginalized communities, let's say in different parts of Europe and maybe in the world also, but for the European Union, let's say that we have marginalized groups living in a very low, I would use that diplomatic phrase that they use, in a low hygienic environment. And we have local epidemics of different illnesses in those areas that can be triggered easily in terms of any kind of floods or any other natural disasters that destroy the profile of their already sensitive environment where we live. I can give an example. In Slovakia, we have a kind of slums in the middle of between 2 or 3 villages, and Roma population is living in those vulnerable natural environment where each stronger hail or floods that they destroy that environment and create very increased vulnerability of access to clean water and hygienic standards, which generates epidemics. And this is one example that we need to take care about in different local contexts, but it's quite interesting topic. Then we explored the agents of emergencies and disasters, and what we explored that in 73 percentages of the responses mentioned extraordinary natural events that are agents in general. And we know that those extraordinary natural events, they appeared also due to either periodical behavior of the nature, which is extremely increase due to climate changes and changes of the profile of meteorological conditions, or etc. Then smartening of the social system, it's quite threatening. I think that with 26 percentages, it means that our advanced technologies, they're becoming a kind of a weapon against us, because they are triggering, practically they can be an easily used agent for destroying the behavior or the order in our societies. CBRN and cyber drivers of disasters and emergencies are counted on 36 percentages. Social behavior, mobility, health status, extremely high, 44 percentages. It means that I used to say that we become and will be maybe ill societies if we don't take care about ourselves, because it means that 44 percentages in the cases our health status is another agent or driver of multiplication of any emergency in case of disaster. And in addition, one responder outlined that the disruption system operators and rescue services providers could also cause a disaster when technology goes wrong. So it means that we also need to focus on a kind of standard operational procedures and to cast an eye on regular basis on the technologies, and to avoid or mitigate or decrease the possibility of any technological failure. Concerning the hybrid threats, fake news and social media, they're on top, 68 percentages. I think it's also a result of the COVID-19 behavior, and We see now that in different parts of the world, different local and national governments, they are trying to impose different measures practically to avoid or challenge the problems created by fake news and social media. Dominant components of effective response, according to our respondents, are emergency response systems. We counted 30 out of 38 respondents, and preparedness of the public. Very, very interesting that public and public preparedness is ranked with 60 percentages, which is quite a lot. And strategic coordination, it's another useful result we need to focus on, that and technological equipment and rescue material is counted only on 26 percentages. We think that of course it's very important, but most of the responders, they also are quite sober, and they know that in terms of financial restrictions or lack of considerable means for financing the preparedness and response, most important is that we introduce a kind of measures and mechanisms how to react and to organize the people and their behavior in time of disaster. There is one very interesting saying of a very famous pilot who says that we don't need to know exactly what to do, but we need to remember that when COVID-19 started and we didn't know what to do, what we did first, that the experience of reacting to something that is shocking and coming out without any expectation or planning, it's very important. And that's why I think that preparedness of public and strategic coordination indeed will be very, very important in the future. A social value of mitigation. Respondents consider that for our societal well-being, most important is the critical infrastructure, distribution caused by pandemics. It can be somehow disrupted. Damages from natural disasters, it should be also counted. It's very important to decrease scarcity of food, water, and migration due to drought. Also very important, we count on the fact that maybe some disasters in other continents or in neighboring countries, that they have direct connection to any impacts in European Union. Let's say that we have migration waves and etc. due to drought. So we practically need also to invest in mitigation and reduction of disasters and their impacts in neighboring countries, because we practically strengthen the security and safety of our societies. Epidemics in combination with public disorder, this is something which you see that we repeated it a lot of time in our questionnaire, and we really think that it's something that should be explored, due to the fact that in recent years we have randomly, but all around Europe, different forms of public disruption. And we still have a lot of to do in that area. Although we have now a kind of a limited number of public events during epidemics or pandemics, one day it will come again, and we need to be prepared to mitigate better any type of public disorder during public events. Smartening of the system is also very important, as you said, and landslides and are very important for the public infrastructure. It seems that it's a kind of a problem spreading all around Europe. And then in terms of tourism, which is a source of income generation and GDP value of in most of European countries, earthquakes are of great taking care about the results of or impacts of any earthquakes or seismic reactions is also important. Mitigation measures concerning our communities and our resistance that most of the responders put on the first place communication with relevant actors. So that structured and intersectoral communication is considered indeed quite important. Planning, participatory interaction of all actors is equally important. Also, quite high-ranked tabletop exercises, which means that many responders consider that we need to practice different type of possible scenarios and to get prepared for that. Very interesting thing is that we might be more strong, let's say, to local and national lawmakers and to try to mainstream any mitigation measures into the local regulatory framework, especially with the land use planning. It is very important. Maybe you can share how it goes in your countries, and I can only say something about Slovakia, that we are trying practically to introduce those mitigation measures in local legislation, because most of the problems are caused by giving construction permissions in areas where are quite vulnerable to any drivers of disasters or any type of climate change and meteorological phenomenon. So it's something that maybe it's so easy to do it. It doesn't cost even anything. It just costs the will of the mayor to change local legislation and to stop giving permissions for construction of luxury houses in landslide zones, for example, because then the costs for the recovery and the rescue activities are covered by the other taxpayers, because the national or local or regional rescue services are going and they're interacting in that area. Then the fostering of the public interests in terms of employment of modern technologies is also highly ranked. And it is very promising that most of the policymakers and actors involved in disaster risk reduction, they consider that the use of different and multiple technologies for developing different scenarios or developing different aspects of risk mitigation measures or planning and reactions that can be helpful. So let's not focus on one traditional technologies. We can use multiple, and we'll be happy to become a platform for sharing different ideas and different results. Cooperation with endangered communities. It refers also to the previous answer that working with the public is very important. And structural investments are given only 18 percentages. And I'll repeat once again that investment is in structural capital investments and investments in like developing dams and barges and etc. It's quite costly in general. Only monitoring of an area which is affected by landslides can leave your wallet up to 3 million euro, and it's quite demanding in terms of financial means. So these are things that should be indeed very carefully managed and coordinated on local and national level. What pays off? Our security pays off, but what exactly and how to develop it? Hazards and threats that are subject to mitigation. So according to our respondents, we have to focus on a couple of hazards. that will be on the table of our rescue activities or any recovery. So these are natural hazards with 78 percentages, disrupted social and public order, very important, also 42 percentages. Also CBRN or in CBRN contaminated environment, including biological agents with 34 percentages, and environment hazards combined with infrastructure disruptions, including also shortage or access to services and citizens' basic needs. Drivers and multipliers advancing the disasters are mostly smartening of the systems because they are considered the most vulnerable elements in responding to disasters, new technologies that are augmenting the impact and exposure, multiplication, and cause non-linear effects. Then the lack of reliable information and lack of structured data, very important. We speak in these days about evidence-based policies, and yes, it's very important to have structured data. And the aim of all methodologies should be how to structure different data and information, and how to use one or comparable models in order to exchange ideas and to exchange knowledge. Because without comparable structured data, we cannot transfer models or practices from one country to another. And some responders also propose to explore how economic and financial and lack of community resources are assigned to vulnerability of adverse events. Attributes of now we go to the end of the questionnaire that we'll explore, and I'll show you a couple of attributes assigned to different type of vulnerabilities. So societable systems, responders assigned following attributes to that type of vulnerability. Utility services are most important: food security, so lack of access to food and drinkable water, and affected residential areas. So when we are looking for the impacts on our societal system, we have to look on how our utility services are sustained and protected, how our food, access to food and drinkable water is also ensured, and how our residential area is secured in terms of natural or man-made disasters. We explored also community vulnerability. We did it purposely in order to understand how the resistance and adaptation behavior and approaches function within a small nuclear of the family, and then community, and then a bigger community of society. And we consider that based on the answers that most important are, according to responders, that for the community are most important social health services, educational sector, also affects on culture, tradition restrictions, and community habits. It's considered in 27 percentages of the responses that when any disasters can also affect those values of the community. What is very nicely surprising for us that these answers lead to disclose that some new trends in accounting for vulnerability versus values of the society. Restrictions and affected habits are considered more important, community than family connections, which also pledges for the greater awareness and public consciousness in the event of disaster and public threat. And we consider that right now that the COVID-19 pandemic created a kind of public conscience, which is very important, that people are more ready to volunteer and to be more responsive in terms of public support in the midst of an emergency or disaster event. Health vulnerability refers, it's also amongst the most critical one, and it refers to mostly to elder people, people with physical disabilities, and also people living in hospitals or social care centers. Social vulnerability is mostly assigned to affected poor and socially excluded groups. It's very interesting. We rank it in 71 percentages, which is also a kind of alert for all of us that we have extremely a lot of different marginalized groups in our societies, and that poverty and energy poverty is something that is not anymore or part of the problems challenged by non-third, we call them third countries, EU, but it's something that also refers to our societies. It's quite alarming. It's alarming for all type of policymakers. And I hope we can further explore this trend, which is, I could say that it's a new phenomenon for European Union. Another social vulnerable community, again, these are elder people and those living in isolated areas or people without access to food, water, and utility services. That those who are poor, they can easily get to that level in the midst of a disaster or any shocking event that cuts their incomes, and they don't have regular economic and financial means. And in general, the injured and victims and children are considered most affected. Finally, we explore the financial vulnerability. Most important is to take care about the unemployment benefits and humanitarian aid. That it means that disasters usually open or unwrap needs for more benefits and humanitarian aids and employment benefits and humanitarian aid. So we need to focus also on development of measures that challenge those needs in terms of when we have any disaster or any shocking event. Then increase poverty and reduce income generation, that during any emergency event or as a result of any disaster or even as a result of climate change, we can have new groups of lacking income generation. For example, I give that in agriculture, for example, we can have in small communities and small societies in European Union families or group of families involved in agriculture that they are affected by droughts or floods, and they just lost their annual crop. So it means that they are also getting they jump into the group of unemployed and group of people with a lack of income generation. Then personal bankruptcy, it's another issue. We counted on 45% of the responses, and we know that it also refers to some financial issues that dealt in the European Union, that we have a lot of different products on the bank markets, and most of people are using the bank system, and they are quite dependent on regular financial means. And if they lose their jobs, they can easily get to personal bankruptcy. Finally, I will close that presentation with a couple of major recommendations for the assessment tool. We need to focus on the combination of natural disasters and disruption of the critical infrastructure. We need to focus on the health threats. in combination with natural disaster and biological hazards and public disorder. This should be our main, this should be our focus. We need to pay attention to the behavior and habits concerning the mobility, to the health status of the community, to the health status of the vulnerable groups, to the environmental degradation all around Europe, concerning different landfills, waste management, and etc., which creates different impacts on the degradation of our environment. And then to pay attention to smartening of the economy and the socioeconomic ecosystems. We need to focus measures on the following threat drivers: natural hazards, climate change and wildlife, social and public disorder, CBRN, environmental hazards, and a shortage of lack of access to services and citizens' basic needs. And mitigation focuses on what to include in the mitigation and prevention activation, use of application and online tools for early warning, use of SMS system, used online reporting system for mapping hazards and threats, environmental damages, burdens, environmental health issues, air and water quality, very important. Use application for management of volunteers, applications and virtual emergency center management also, and how to organize the communication and preparedness, to use public information and communication to work with the multipliers on a regional and local level, and to use online and other media campaigns, to focus on simulation measures, to use active learning online and active classroom learning, and intersectoral communication is also very important. These are practically measures that are within the questionnaire were proposed as tools used by those responders. So it's something that we can just multiply it because it's already in use. So there are good practices in place. And comments about the model of the online assessment, I think that they would come by the end of our discussion. But in general, we would like to focus on the type of, we need to decide, not today, but in the next months, what type of scenario and contingency planning we need to focus on, what are the drivers, and to focus on vulnerability exposure in terms of quantitative impacts, damages and values, and qualitative impacts, societal values. Main drivers are considered so-called megatrends: changes in climate, land use, economic evolution since 20th century beginning, global developments that bring challenges, increased urbanization, rapid development of construction and land use planning, decrease of agricultural land, deforestation, mass tourism, biotopes degradation, smartening of engineering network and new technologies, and urban communication infrastructure. Thank you for following me for 20, 30 and more minutes. I hope I gave you a complex view about our survey.